This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is July 27th, 2021, and I'm producer Pat. We have three interesting segments for you this week. Darren takes a look at who the youngest mother ever is. Adam does a deep dive into the notion of hollow earth, but first Christina checks out headlines surrounding the Olympics and cardboard beds. A warning that Darren's segment discusses sexual abuse and may not be suitable for some listeners.
Were anti-sex beds installed at the 2020 Olympics? Okay, this sounds absolutely ridiculous. I mean, what is an anti-sex bed anyway? But let's dive in. As many of us know, the Tokyo Olympics kicked off last week after being delayed due to the pandemic. One Japanese newspaper reported, quote, "The latest surge in COVID-19 cases in Tokyo has medical experts so worried that some are suggesting canceling the Summer Olympics even after the start of the competitions if the infection spread worsens." Obviously, the news of another surge of COVID in Tokyo affecting its citizens and possibly derailing the games is devastating. But it seems there's another Olympic-related news story that has captured people's attention. The so-called Olympic Games anti-sex bed. Now, Stephen Colbert did a bit during his Late Show monologue this past week highlighting a Newsweek story that says, athletes will have to sleep on beds that are allegedly designed to collapse under the weight of any more than one occupant in order to discourage sex. Colbert's punchline? Because we know if there's one thing world-class athletes can't do is have sex in unusual positions. I thought that was very funny. But obviously Colbert's in the business of doing comedy, and his writing team could not possibly pass up on this story. The joke almost writes itself, right? But it is the type of thing that does help fuel misinformation that's already circulating on social media, especially if you just take the claim at face value and don't look behind the headlines. Our friends at Snopes.com tackle the claim, which is that anti-sex beds made out of cardboard have been installed in the Olympic Village at the 2020 Games. Yes, the 2020 Games, it's 2021, but they're still referred to as the 2020 Games. Earlier this month, the rumor started circulating on socials with a post featuring a photo of said beds, along with the following text. Games without sex. These are the anti-sex beds in which the Olympic athletes will sleep to avoid contagion of COVID. They are made of cardboard and will be recycled. They only support the weight of one person. It breaks in any sudden movement. A tweet by U.S. distant runner and Olympic medalist Paul Kalemo certainly didn't help quell the rumor. He speculated that the beds in the Tokyo Olympic Village were constructed for avoiding intimacy and wrote that, quote, "Beds will be able to withstand the weight of a single person to avoid situations beyond sports." Okay, since this story broke, you've likely seen a couple of videos go viral from athletes, quote unquote, testing out the beds with various activities. A U.S. rugby player posted a video, which is linked in our show notes, of players jumping up and down, skipping, doing yoga on the beds. Guess what? The beds barely budged, let alone collapsed. Irish gymnast Rhys McClenaghan kicked off a video he posted on Twitter saying, "On today's episode of Fake News at the Olympic Games," and then repeatedly jumps on the bed, handily debunking the notion that these beds could easily collapse with extra weight or movement. In fact, the Olympics applauded Rhys, retweeting his video saying, "Thanks for debunking the myth." So yes, it is true that the Olympic Village has been outfitted with cardboard beds that look something like you may find in an IKEA catalog, quite frankly. They are designed by Japanese manufacturer Airweave with frames made out of impact-resistant cardboard. And yes, they can easily support the weight of two average-sized people, and no, they don't break or collapse with any sudden movements. A press release from Tokyo 2020 detailed the specs of the bed, citing, "The design of the mattress leverages the latest innovations in bed surface technology." So these frames can actually support up to 200 kilograms or 440 pounds. Now, over the years, the Olympic Village has garnered a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a hedonistic hotbed, if you will. Zach Purchase, who is a retired Olympic rower, said publicly this is far from the truth and reminds people that these athletes are completely focused on bringing their best to the games. It really is pretty silly to think someone who's made so many sacrifices their entire life is going to jeopardize their performance with romantic distractions once they get to the village. But here we are. It doesn't help, though, when you hear stories like at the 2016 Summer Games in Rio, where almost 500,000 condoms were supplied to the 10,500 and so athletes during their 17-day stay. That's a lot of condoms. Or in Brazilian slang, camisinhas, which I'd never heard before and made me laugh out loud because I speak Portuguese. A little side note, in Portuguese, you'll often hear inha or inho at the end of a word. Diminutives are often used to describe something or someone as little or cute. Inha applying to feminine words, inho to masculine. I have a small tattoo in my dad's handwriting of the word beijinhos, which is how he'd sign off cards and notes. Beijo means kiss, but beijinhos means little kisses. So the word camisa means shirt, so camisinhas means little shirts. Anyways, very funny. In truth, the intention behind using these cardboard frames is really more noble and quite simple. Sustainability. After the games wrap up on August 8th, the beds will be recycled into paper products and the mattress components recycled into new plastic products. As Tokyo 2020 says, this will be the first time in Olympic and Paralympic history that all beds and bedding are made almost entirely from renewable materials. So there you have it. Stay safe, stay classy, and not smart-assy.
Is the Earth hollow? This silly idea is similar, though contradictory, to flat Earth theory, and has been suggested in some recent movies. I figured I'd look into it so that I'd be able to get a better appreciation for these films, because that's what's important in life. The highly anticipated Godzilla vs. Kong was recently released in theaters. Though it came out just as my city was locking down, I was able to see it just as the theaters were opening back up before it got pulled, because it had been out for a while. The movie's now out on video, so I watched it again and again and again. A chunk of the movie literally takes place in the Hollow Earth. It's a fully formed ecosystem at the center of our planet, but this idea was not created by the movie at all. Godzilla vs. Kong is part of what is called the Monsterverse, and is a series of movies that has suggested that the Hollow Earth existed for a few years now. Those movies did not create the idea either. So in 2017's Kong Skull Island, it suggested that there's an entrance to the Hollow Earth on King Kong's native island, Skull Island, and that the skull crawlers, these generic-looking monsters from the film, come from the Hollow Earth. So later in the 2019 film Godzilla King of the Monsters, we learn that Godzilla uses underground tunnels to quickly traverse the globe, which are all part of this Hollow Earth idea.
Spoiler alert, Adam.
Spoiler for Godzilla King of the Monsters. So Godzilla visits this underwater flooded city, which is located in the Hollow Earth. That's kind of the idea. And finally, in the latest film, the Hollow Earth plays a significant role. So the Hollow Earth is presented, as it is more traditionally explained, as a subterranean world with a sort of inverse gravity, where the surface is actually the inner crust of the Earth, right? So think about, you would hollow out the Earth, and then when you're inside, you're sticking towards the outside of that big sort of bubble.
But the logic here being that you're being pulled upwards.
Yes, it doesn't really
because
make sense,
of the gravity, blah. Okay.
Yes. So in the film, there is a gravitational inversion, which occurs while people enter the Hollow Earth, which kills most living beings unless they're either these super cool monsters like King Kong, or traveling in these special flying crafts, Hollow Earth aerial vehicles, which are designed specifically to travel to the Hollow Earth. It's like a plot point in the film. So what's all this about? So this is the thing people actually do or did believe. They used to, and like anything, some people still do believe it. The idea is that the Earth itself is not as solid, and it does not have a molten core as modern science suggests it does. So this theory does predate sort of us actually understanding what the Earth was made of as well, to be fair. So the Earth is a hollow sphere. We're all living on the outside of the sphere, but people also live on the inside of the sphere. So, from inside of the Hollow Earth, the ground is the concave surface, and it would go up on the horizon, and the sky would be sort of the center of the Earth, and then past that, you would see sort of the other side of the Hollow Earth. There's also a mini sun in the middle of the Hollow Earth, an inner sun.
cute, kind of like a ring world.
Yes, kind of. It's Halo's very similar, right? It's like a ring, only it would go all the way around. So the entrances to the Hollow Earth are said to be at the poles. So the idea is that the Aurora Borealis are rays of light from the Hollow Earth's sort of inner sun escaping from the core. Not everyone believes in the inner sun, but that's part of the general idea. So there's a lot of like minor variations on the Hollow Earth idea. The first suggestion was by E. Edmund Halley, who said that the Earth was a series of hollow shells. So the outer one is the one we live on, and then there were two similar shells inside the Earth, so there would be an atmosphere and magnetic poles for each of those surfaces. And a big proponent of this idea was John Cleves Symes, who believed there to be a number of concentric spheres, one within another, and that the opening at the north and south poles were Sims holes. So one idea about the people living in the Hollow Earth is that there's a kingdom called Agartha. So this was suggested by Alexandre Saint-Omer d'Alvèdre. So Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth describes a Hollow Earth which contains two binary stars, and there are dinosaurs there. I haven't actually read that one or seen any of the movies, but that's probably the more popular Hollow Earth fiction.
I was waiting for Jules Verne to come up.
Yeah. The video game Final Fantasy IV has another world deep within the Earth. This is one of my favorite games. So unlike the Hollow Earth, this world isn't on the inside of the surface of the Earth, but it's a sort of a parallel surface deep within the Earth, where up is still up and down is still down. So this is first reached through a large cave, and later through a tower, which goes from the underworld all the way to the surface. So there's no gravity inversion in this tower. It simply has its base on the surface of the underworld. It goes all the way to the surface. And the underworld is populated mostly by dwarves in that game, but there are also there's also an even deeper world where the summoned monsters live. There's some fairies. Summoned monsters includes Titan, and Titan's what they call the monsters in King Kong. So there's some similar ideas there.
Also the Greek gods, ancient Greek gods, the Titans.
Yes, yeah, same general idea. So many other works of fiction have similar ideas, such as Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar, which was mentioned in a number of his stories. So this is a world on the inside of the Earth's shell with a miniature sun at the center, and it's accessed through the poles. So again, this world has dinosaurs. It's a common theme. There's often dinosaurs in the Hollow Earth. So does this make any sense? From a physics point of view, not really. So if you have a shell, then the gravity wouldn't let you stick to the inside surface of that shell. That's just not how gravity works. And this is how it's generally portrayed in the Godzilla vs. Kong film. So more or less, diagrams of the Earth show tunnels and a spherical ball inside the Earth. It's maybe a third or a quarter of the diameter of the Earth. There are a large number of tunnels going to the Hollow Earth, but even though it's well established that one of those tunnels opens on Skull Island, they choose to move King Kong all the way to Antarctica in the film. It's not really explained why that's such a great idea. It just leads to him fighting Godzilla. So when we see Kong in the Hollow Earth, the environment looks like a flat floor and a ceiling, not like the inside of a sphere. We don't see sort of the outer walls. We don't see it sort of taper up. And there's also a scene where there's a bunch of flying rocks floating in zero gravity and sort of a plane in the middle of the Hollow Earth. So Kong kind of jumps from the floor to the ceiling, which becomes the new floor. So there's sort of like this idea that he's like on one side and goes to the other side of the Hollow Earth. But it doesn't really make much sense that the gravity would be like a plane here, since the Hollow Earth is supposed to be a sphere and not sort of this big flat open area. In fact, in diagrams of the Hollow Earth seen in the film, we see that it's that sphere, like I mentioned. So I'm not sure where the breakdown occurred. Like, did the script not match the storyboards, or did someone doing the special effects just decide to confuse people with that sphere diagram? I'm not really sure. But I think there was probably some sort of communication breakdown there. Ultimately, the direction of down in the Hollow Earth ends up being up on the Earth, as shown in the film. So Godzilla blasts a hole in the ground because Godzilla can actually detect where King Kong is, even though we were supposed to put King Kong in the Hollow Earth to hide him from Godzilla, but whatever. So he blasts a hole in the ground in Hong Kong, and it shows up coming out of the ground in the Hollow Earth, so it really kind of comes out of the opposite side. Now, an interesting article for Looper is titled, "Why the Gravity in Godzilla vs. Kong's Hollow Earth Makes No Sense." And that has some details on some of the problems in here. So Dr. Jed Macusko, a professor of physics at Wake Forest University, says that the way it's depicted in the film is pretty much impossible. He says that if the Earth was hollow, then everything within that outer layer of mass would be weightless. So the mass on either side of the shell would cancel the other out. He instead suggests that a more plausible configuration would be spheres one inside another, right? Sort of like nested dolls with gaps between the shells. So it's kind of like in Final Fantasy IV, kind of like a suggestion in some other works of fiction or some other models. What would really happen if you went to the center of our Earth? So the Earth is solid, but the gravity would gradually lower as you approach the planet's core. So if King Kong jumped into a layer of the Earth, which was close to the core, he should be able to just jump really high depending on how deep he is, right? And this gravity inversion idea in the film doesn't really make any sense. Theoretically, the gravity would be inverted only once the subject crosses the actual center of the Earth, not on their way down the tunnel. Gravity's effect would diminish until the center and then gradually increase in the other direction. But in the film, the inversion is instantaneous and so extreme that it wreaks havoc on anyone who isn't a Titan. It's kind of their name for like kaiju or giant monster. And it isn't really presented as an actual inversion. They have this sort of, they say it's like a vortex that propels them instantly through the tunnel to the hollow Earth, traveling at great speeds. So sort of this instantaneous acceleration that kills a lot of things. There's no physical reason for this. It doesn't make a lot of sense to call it inversion because nothing's being inverted, but that's what they call it in the movie. Ultimately, the hollow Earth goes against most of what we know about how planets are formed and what they're actually made of. So seismic waves travel through the Earth in such a way that it's consistent with it being mostly solid, and it's not what we would expect as a behavior if the Earth was a hollow sphere or a series of hollow spheres. Earth's gravity, coupled with the average density of rock, suggests that our planet would have the surface gravity that we do observe, so it's likely full. There's likely no considerable sized hole in there. If it were hollow to any significant extent, the gravity on Earth would be much lower. There'd be something unexplained about the density of the core or something like that. And also, gravity in general means that it's sort of in space, objects clump together, so a shell would not be a sort of stable shape for a planet to form, right? Asteroids, moons, planets, stars, they're not generally hollow. It wouldn't form naturally that way. So the deepest hole ever drilled is the Kola Super Deep Borehole. So this is only about 12 kilometers deep, and the Earth has a 6,400 kilometer diameter, right? It's about 3,200 kilometer radius. So basically, we haven't been able to directly contradict the idea of a hollow Earth by digging, because we just haven't gotten that deep. But it's implausible for other reasons. Despite what some may claim, there also aren't massive holes or caverns found in the North Pole or South Pole which lead to the hollow Earth. Maybe when we hadn't really explored it, it made some sense. Various theories do suggest different things. This would have seemed plausible hundreds of years ago. A lot of the Earth wasn't explored. Now, this was meant to be the end of my Hollow Earth segment, but after writing it, out of pure chance, I happened to read a short story with a fresh take on the Hollow Earth by Sushin Zhu, which is called Cloud of Poems. So this is the author best known for his Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. So Three Body Problem, Dark Forest, Death's End. So those are great books. You should read them. And this short story was kind of cool. It takes place in a future in which our Earth was turned into a hollow Earth in our future by being hollowed out and then spun up so that there's a sort of gravity on the inside of the shell through centrifugal force. So similar to a space station might be. So very interesting story. It was part of a collection titled To Hold Up the Skies, if you want to check that out. I would check out his trilogy first. They're very
longer, but I liked it.
Yes. The Hollow Earth makes for interesting fiction, but it doesn't really hold up to even the most basic amount of scrutiny. Further, the type of hollow Earth and odd gravitational effects suggested by Godzilla vs. Kong have no basis in reality. It's still a decent movie, which gives representation to the often neglected demographic podcasters. So I'd recommend checking it out. Just don't believe everything the movie tells you about fluoride.
Because it wasn't a documentary.
No, not really.
Well, thank you, Adam. And as I said when I found out you were doing this, coincidentally, I've been listening to a Great Courses lecture series called How the Earth Works, where they teach me geological facts. And so he had a lecture based on these similar things, Hollow Earth. I'm like, okay, you mentioned Jules Verne? Yeah. You mentioned we've only drilled down 12 kilometers? Yeah. So the other little nuggets which I can share, which I otherwise would not have known, but coincidentally was 3 days ago, there is a solid iron-nickel inner core. It's surrounded by a moving pit of molten iron and nickel. Mm-hmm. The inner core is actually about 75% the size of the moon. So that's relatively interesting.
Yeah.
As you said, basic scrutiny is enough. There's no way this could be hollow. It makes no sense whatsoever from everything we know about all the physics. Number one, not just gravity, but the pressure, which relates, of course, to gravity.
Sure.
But the pressure is so intense, he said something like, if you took a block of granite and just put it even part way down, it would compress to half the size. Everything is really, really compressed. There is no open space at all near the center of the Earth.
Oh, so even if there was some sort of hollow core, it would just...
No. Immediately.
Just
But there's not even a tunnel. There's not a space. There's like not even space between rocks. This thing is so compressed. So that was one thing. I'm like, okay, there's just no space at all. It's just everything's squished down. Because I'm like, what's at what sea level? It's what 101 kilopascals or something like that.
Sure.
Near the core, it's like a million. It's something like this. Yes, exactly. It's ridiculous. And he also said is because things are so compressed and it's so warm, if you were down there and you could suddenly somehow see out as they do in these ships, you would just see like blinding light. Because everything is so hot.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's interesting too. So you can't even see anything. And then, of course, as I sometimes remember, but sometimes forget, the spinning of the core is what creates the magnetosphere, which is what protects us from solar radiation.
Yes.
So while the sun does warm us from above and the core does warm us from beneath, if the core wasn't spinning the way it does, we would be too harmed from solar radiation that we wouldn't be able to survive. So thanks, core. I don't think about you enough. In June, The Sun UK reported that an 11-year-old gave birth and is believed to be Britain's youngest mother, becoming pregnant at age 10. They also reported that the family was unaware of this and social services are investigating.
Oh, boy.
The piece quotes Carol Cooper, the Sun's in-house doctor, I guess, who said, quote, "The average age at which a girl begins puberty is 11. Though it can be any time between 8 and 14 or younger, weight affects many hormones. And because children are heavier lately, puberty is happening earlier these days."
Okay.
Still quoting, "There's a higher risk of a low birth weight baby, preeclampsia, premature labor, and many infections," which is not that surprising if you're having birth at such a young age.
Oh, yeah.
Prior to this recent birth, the youngest British mom was a 12-year-old back in 2006. Additionally, the lowest combined age to British parents went to a 12 and 13-year-old in 2014. The lives of others, indeed.
I guess that's better that they were close in age.
Versus some older man raping a child, yes.
Yes.
So yes, I think of just like, well, 12 years is a smaller age difference between siblings in some families. It'd just be so odd if your child was a 12-year gap with you, right?
Your uncle who's younger than you type of thing.
Yeah, one of these things.
Yes.
So reading this led me to wonder, well, what's the youngest mother on record? Well, do you want to take a guess? Adam, what's your answer?
6.
Well, if you did guess 6, you're wrong, but you're close. 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days is the age of the youngest confirmed mother. Her name is Lina Medina. She is Peruvian, and she's actually still alive at the age of 87. She was born in 1933.
Oh, this is a very long time ago. Okay.
Yes, but, still within a century.
Yes.
Now, my source for this is Wikipedia, and I'll selectively quote from the article, which is available on our website, trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
Her parents took her to a hospital in Piso at age 5 due to increasing abdominal size. Doctors originally thought she had a tumor, but then determined that she was in her 7th month of pregnancy. Dr. Aroldo Lozada had specialists in Lima confirm the pregnancy. There was widespread interest in the case. The San Antonio Light newspaper in Texas reported in its 16th of July 1939 edition that a Peruvian obstetrician and midwife association had demanded this girl be admitted to a national maternity hospital. Anyway, 6 weeks after the diagnosis, Medina gave birth to a boy by cesarean section. The cesarean birth was necessitated, of course, by her small pelvis. The doctors found she had fully mature sexual organs from precocious puberty. Dr. Edmundo Somel reported her case in the medical journal La Presse Médicale, indicating that her first period had occurred at 8 months of age, in contrast to previous reports that said she had had regular periods since the age of 3, or 2.5. Medina's son weighed 2.7 kilograms, that's 6 pounds, at birth, and was named Geraldo after her doctor. He was raised believing Medina to be a sister before finding out at age 10 that she was his mother. Wow. Medina has never revealed the identity of the father, nor the circumstances of her impregnation. Escomel suggests that she might not know herself, as she couldn't give precise responses. I'm not sure what that means. Lina's father was arrested on suspicion of child sexual abuse, but released due to lack of evidence. Her son grew up healthy. The son actually died in 1979, aged 40, from bone marrow disease. So she outlived her son. Although it was speculated that the case was a hoax, a number of doctors over the years have verified it based on biopsies, x-rays of the fetal skeleton in utero, and photographs taken by the doctors caring for her. There are 2 published photographs documenting the case. The first was taken around the beginning of April 1939, when Medina was 7.5 months into pregnancy. This is from her left side. She's in front of a neutral backdrop. It's the only published photo. In 1955, except for the effects of precocious puberty, there was no explanation of how a girl less than 5 years old could conceive a child. Hers is the only documented case of extreme precocious pregnancy in a child under 6. So it is believed she is the only person confirmed to have given birth under 6. It's also one of the extremely rare cases of precocious puberty, which is just puberty happens really early. It has many different reasons, but in this case, they don't know exactly the reason. So we don't know if it was due to abuse or some peculiar situation. No matter what, obviously something awry happened, no matter what. And many other cases in this long list of, young mothers, typically there was abuse involved by someone older. There are rare or peculiar occurrences like the 12 and the 13-year-old in Britain, or there's I think it was a 10 and 11-year-old in China. I guess they were exploring or doing everything, and it seems consensual. It's just like, but you're that young, but, how can it really be?
But a 5-year-old, 6-year-old boy wouldn't be able to impregnate a girl. So
Correct.
It doesn't make sense.
But a 10 or 11-year-old could, which you could also say, well, what does a 10-year-old know, with a 6-year-old? No matter what, there's some concerning, creepy, disgusting things there.
Yes.
Why I mentioned, though, is when we think about the nature of the world, if someone said, well, what's the youngest thing someone gave birth? I would not have picked under 6. I just wouldn't have. Even though if someone said does puberty happen at 8? Do I know about broader trends? Do I know about bell curves and there's extremes?
Well, there's just billions of people on the earth.
Yeah. So when you start to get to those numbers, because if she was born in 33, that means like in her lifetime, billions of people have been born, but no one like her. So this really is more like not just 1 in a billion. This is 1 in billions. Women can give birth and men can't. So you have to half the number of people who could actually do this. Sure. And there may have been others which just weren't confirmed. But all that to say, this does seem like 1 in a billion odds, which means it is exceptionally rare. Yes. And then I just think of what peculiar life that would be, that your own child is, you're pretty the same demographic. For lack of a better phrase, and how weird that might be. Now, you could imagine there's lots of negatives, but if someone helped raise them, maybe it would be, I don't know. Anyway, it's an odd thing to think about. It was mainly, this is an interesting fact about the world, a fact about human biology, and that chances are almost everyone picked a number 2 eye. Yeah,
it's scientifically interesting, and I find it very upsetting, like just the whole idea.
Yes. How old is your daughter?
4.
Yes. Well, this is clearly more reasonable for that to be upsetting, and it is upsetting. It's also very peculiar.
Yeah.
Well, this is a disturbing case. It does highlight the need for sex education for everyone else, and with greater sex education and support for different types of services, hopefully these things can, first of all, not happen, but everyone's aware that they actually could happen.
Yeah.
Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.